Many people believe ChatGPT is learning while they use it. It certainly feels that way. You ask a question, it adapts to the conversation, it remembers what you said a moment ago, sometimes it even admits it was wrong and changes its answer. So here's a simple question. Is it actually becoming smarter while you're talking to it? A few days ago, I was listening to an interview with futurist Amy Webb. She said something that made me stop and rewind. She said AI is different from previous technologies because it can self-improve. That may sound like a small claim, but I don't believe it is. Just to be clear, this isn't really about Amy Webb. She has spent years thinking seriously about the future, and whether you agree with her or not isn't the point. What interests me is something much broader. The language we use to describe AI is becoming increasingly imprecise. We casually say AI learns, AI reasons, AI understands, AI is conscious. More recently, I've even heard that a few times. AI is self-improving. Each of those phrases carries assumptions, and once those assumptions become part of our mental model, they quietly influence every conversation that follows. When most people hear the phrase self-improving AI, they imagine something fairly obvious. An AI notices its own mistakes, changes itself, becomes a little smarter, then repeats the process, almost like a student who studies after every exam and gradually gets better over time. It's an intuitive picture, and perhaps one day it will become reality. But if that's the picture in your mind when you use ChatGPT or Claude today, then you're imagining something those systems simply are not doing. Let's start with something surprisingly simple. Every time you type a prompt into ChatGPT, the model does not stop to learn from you. It doesn't rewrite part of its neural network. It doesn't adjust the billions of parameters that determine how it behaves. It doesn't become a slightly better model because you happen to ask an interesting question. Instead, it uses the knowledge that was encoded during training to generate one token, then the next, until it produces a response. Throughout that process, the model itself remains unchanged. At this point, some people may object. That can't be right. It clearly remembers what I said earlier. It adapts its answers. Sometimes it even apologizes and corrects itself. And that's true. But remembering a conversation isn't the same as learning from it. During your chat, the model is using the context you've already provided to generate a better response. That's very different from permanently changing the model itself. When the conversation finishes, the neural network hasn't acquired a new skill or learned a new fact because of your interaction. So if the model isn't learning while we use it, when does it actually learn? The answer is during training, not during the conversation. Before a model like ChatGPT is ever released, it spends weeks or even months processing enormous amounts of data. During that process, its internal parameters are adjusted billions of times, gradually encoding patterns about language, reasoning, and the relationships between ideas. Once that training is complete, the model you interact with is essentially frozen. From that point on, it's applying what it has already learned, not acquiring new knowledge from each user. Now perhaps we can finally return to the original claim. If today's models aren't making themselves smarter while we use them, what do people actually mean when they talk about self-improving AI? Researchers have a name for that idea. It is called recursive self-improvement. It sounds complicated, but the concept itself is surprisingly simple. Imagine a system that becomes better at improving itself. That improvement then makes it even better at improving itself again. The output of one cycle becomes the starting point for the next, creating a potentially accelerating loop. Whether that will ever happen is still an open scientific question, but one thing is clear. It isn't how today's systems operate. That doesn't mean AI isn't contributing to AI research. It is, of course. Engineers already use it to write code, analyze results, generate ideas, and automate parts of the development process. Those are important advances, but notice what is actually happening. The AI is helping people build better AI. It isn't independently redesigning itself between conversations or quietly becoming more intelligent overnight. That distinction may seem subtle, but I think it's one of the most important distinctions we can make. A technology becoming more capable is not the same thing as the technology making itself more capable. Airplanes, for example, became faster because engineers improved them. Computers became more powerful because people redesigned them. The internet became more useful because millions of humans expanded it over time. We never described those technologies as self-improving. AI deserves the same precision, in my opinion. Otherwise, we stop describing what is happening and start describing what we imagine is happening. You might, of course, be wondering whether this distinction is really worth making. After all, if AI is helping create better AI, isn't that close enough? I personally believe it isn't, because the language we use shapes the way we think. If I tell you that AI is improving itself, you'll naturally imagine a technology that has begun taking responsibility for its own development. But that's a very different picture from one in which people are still directing, training, and deploying increasingly capable systems. One description reflects reality, the other anticipates a possibility. None of this means recursive self-improvement is impossible. It may happen. Many respected researchers believe some form of it could eventually emerge, while others remain more skeptical. That is a fascinating scientific debate, and I'm not trying to settle it here. My point is much simpler. We shouldn't describe today's systems as though tomorrow's capabilities have already arrived. Predictions belong in the future, descriptions belong in the present. Once we blur those two together, it becomes surprisingly difficult to reason clearly. I have noticed the same pattern with many of the words we use around AI. We say AI thinks, AI understands, AI reasons, AI is conscious, AI is self-improving. Sometimes those words have perfectly valid technical meanings inside machine learning. But outside that context, they carry much richer meanings rooted in human experience, in my opinion. As those meanings quietly drift together, discussions become more emotional and less precise. That's not just a problem of language, it's a problem of thought. This is one of the reasons why conversations about AI often feel so confused. One person is describing what exists today, another is describing what they believe could exist in 10 or 20 years. A third is mixing the two without realizing it. Yet everyone uses the same words, as though they're talking about the same thing. They aren't. Before we debate whether AI is autonomous, conscious, or self-improving, we should first agree on what those words actually mean. Otherwise, we are arguing past one another from the very beginning. I think this is one of the quiet dangers of hype. Not because it makes the technology seem more impressive, but because it slowly replaces careful descriptions with compelling stories. Stories are easier to remember. They're also easier to believe. Before long, possibilities start sounding like facts, and speculation starts sounding like observation. Once that happens, it's no longer obvious where the technology ends and our imagination begins. That's a difficult place from which to make good decisions. Maybe one day AI will become capable of recursive self-improvement. Maybe it won't. That's an important scientific question, and researchers are actively exploring it. But it isn't today's question. Today's question is much simpler. Are we describing the technology we actually have or the technology we imagine is coming? Because those are not the same thing. If we hope to have better conversations about AI, we need better language. And if we want better language, we have to be willing to make careful distinctions, not because precision is an academic exercise, but because clear thinking has always begun with clear definitions. Thank you for watching.